now like to continue this conversation with two panelists from around the world talking about tech sovereignty and the contest on artificial intelligence. I am going to be taking audience questions, so please do send them through. I'll be keeping an eye out for them, and this is your conversation as much as it is mine. So I am joined by Rajeev Chandrasekhar, the former Digital Minister of State in India, and Chloé Goupille, the Secretary General for the Summit for Action on Artificial Intelligence. Welcome. Rajeev, I want to start with you. I was just speaking to Jacob, and so much of this AI conversation centers on China, the US, and Europe. But where does that leave countries like India and others around the world?
Well, I think to start with, Melissa, thank you for having me. And no, I think these are early days, Melissa. I think the last word on AI hasn't been written. These are really early days, and so yes, I think the Americans and the Chinese have taken certainly a lead. But countries like India, we have 1 billion Indians connected on the internet, are very rapidly adopting AI, because pretty much everything that's on the internet today is being AI powered. So there is a very, very rapid pace of AI. And in terms of developing AI capabilities, we are not too far behind. There's a lot of publicity, obviously, the American big tech companies have got. But I will predict that going down the line about 6 to 8 months from now, this will become a much more complex conversation with many countries demo AI capabilities. And an AI capability is really today a sovereign, almost a sovereign goal and a sovereign objective for many of the larger digital economies and innovation economies.
And Chloé, you recently held the Summit for Action on AI in Paris in February, and this was trying to get more global leaders at the table. But that's very noble. But when in practice, again, in reality, when we see that the US doesn't want to regulate and Europe does, can any meaningful guidelines really be established?
Well, thank you also for inviting me on this discussion. And this fragmentation of the international landscape was definitely something we had in mind when we started organizing the summit. Few companies and few countries are building AI, while the technology is used worldwide with huge implications. And besides, AI is really changing the way we think, we work. So it's not a neutral technology. It's become a political object, with countries adopting national strategies. More than 60 of them now have a national strategy on AI. Yet, more than 110 countries don't have a seat in the main AI international governance bodies. And that's what we had in mind when we brought together all these actors at the summit. We really wanted to make sure that we were creating this new and wide space to have this conversation with more than 100 countries present, but also with the private sector who's building the technology, and more than 300 CEOs worldwide from big and small companies who were there to discuss AI, but most importantly, to take action. You mentioned regulation. It was one of the topics of the summit, but the most important issue was how can we act concretely to make a difference within coalitions, to lower the carbon footprint of AI, make sure gender biases are avoided, have a greater solidarity. And all of that conversation was started in Paris, and we hope that we laid groundwork for a more cooperative path on this development of AI models.
Certainly, it was a great initiative to bring all those countries together. The conversation we're having now around AI and regulation reminds me very much of social media, when social media was a new thing, when the way people used Facebook was new, and we very much allowed these tech companies to self-regulate. Were they a publisher? Were they responsible for what was on their platform? And Jacob and I touched on this very briefly, talking about misinformation. But, in India, Rajeev, we have seen cases of misinformation that spread on social media, on WhatsApp. We've seen actual killings happen because of fake news that is spread. And I'm just interested to hear your perspective, having served as digital minister. Are there lessons that you think we could learn from what we did or didn't do with social media platforms?
Oh, absolutely, 100%, Melissa. I think, look, there's many lessons to be learned, and there are mistakes that we should certainly avoid. Look, tech in general and innovation in general has always been a paradox. and the narrative of tech, doing good, creating innovation, creating opportunities has always run ahead of the narrative of the problems with tech, the downside of tech, the harm and the criminality that is enabled by tech. So I would argue that if you think social media has been a challenge for governments and societies to deal with, AI is going to be that to a factor of 1 million. It is a significantly larger, bigger problem. And frankly, I think these conversations that we are having don't go to the depth of the problem yet. And then one of the big frustrations about people who are dealing with this or who have dealt with this is that the conversation and the narrative of AI and tech in general, uh, doing good, creating all of these great, wonderful use cases, while they're all true and they're all correct, that the parallel, similar narrative around how do we address the issues of harm, how do we address the issues of criminality, how do we address the issues of misuse. That conversation, I think, hasn't grown fast enough, hasn't been broad enough, hasn't been cerebral enough, deep enough. So I think from my own experience as minister for 3.5 years, we really struggled with reining in social media, not reining in from a point of view of the free speech. And that is really one of the other problems, is that this has always been made into a sort of a binary that you can either have free speech or you can have safety. You can't have both. And I think there is a need for countries around the world to start really having serious conversations of not making this a binary. We can do free speech, we can create all the benefits that AI and tech can deliver for society and humanity as a whole. But at the same time, we can also have a responsible conversation about how do we create guardrails and principles that tech should not trespass into harm and criminality.
Well, how do we do that? How can we protect free speech and have guardrails?
Look, I think the current attempt is certainly not going to work, which is where we have each country or each group of countries trying to do something of its own. The Europeans have an approach towards AI and tech. The Americans have a different approach. Singapore, Australia have their approach. We have our approach. China, of course, have got a walled-off internet, so they don't have any approach that we can align with. But I think there needs to be a deliberate conversation, which we proposed during the Global Partnership of AI conference in New Delhi in 2023, where democracies come together, if not all, many of them, in forums like the AI Action Summit, in forums like the AI Safety Summit, where we talk seriously about a global protocol, about a global understanding of what ought to be the guardrails that then get prescribed to these platforms and that they are accountable for. It is not enough, according to me, and I've been around the block for 35 years in tech, to just simply say, we'll pat you on your hand if you make a mistake, and you should have self-regulation and you should have these guidelines that look very great, but effectively just increase the concentration of power and decrease and diminish accountability of these big platforms. So I think my short answer to your question is the countries need to come together, especially democracies, to sort of agree on a harmonized set of principles and guardrails that will then be legally, these platforms have to be legally accountable for.
So Chloé, to that point, you brought together all of these leaders, at the summit. And when we talk about accountability, it's a really good point that Rajeev just brought up. The leaders who are at these summits like these aren't necessarily the people who are skilled to really understand the technology and know how to legislate about it or know how to hold those leaders accountable. I mean, how much do we need to see the governments working with private companies to be able to enforce something that is realistic and that makes a difference?
Well, that's indeed extremely important, and it's the reason why we had so many different actors in Paris, not just governments, but also artists, academia, civil society, and companies. And as you know, this technology is evolving extremely rapidly, which is a challenge for governments and for regulators. But at the same time, it's such a powerful technology that it's impossible to let it develop without a clear framework. And to answer to that, we really need to have a very strong cooperation between all actors. First of all, a smart discussion between governments and experts. I think that's what happened in the EU with the development of the AI Act, but also in other parts of the world right now, in Brazil, South Korea, which have similar conversations going on. Also, it's important that we don't lose track of what citizens and consumers want. And that's really important in the way we further adjust regulation around AI to make sure there's no mistrust that's growing, and that models which are being developed really suit their needs and answer to the main missions of having high value for society in sectors like health and education. And third, I believe we need to develop, at least in Europe, a specific know-how on how you build AI and how you use it in your society to be able to really regulate in the right manner. And that was something that was really strong in the summit. You often expect Europe to come about on the regulation side, but actually the Commission was very strong, and France too, on new investment, innovation, building AI factories. The European Commission followed on with its plan for an AI continent. So really being sovereign and autonomous enough and being able to develop this capacity in order to then regulate it correctly and strike the right balance between innovation and regulation.
So let me ask you both a question, and you know, everything you said sounds fantastic and sounds great on paper, but in practice, how much power do governments actually have over these increasingly powerful tech CEOs? Are we almost seeing an imbalance here? Because ultimately, when we look at social media, I mean, many governments are calling these tech leaders, pleading with them to take down content, pleading with them to do something. I mean, how much can governments actually rule over these tech companies? And, you know, especially as we look at the next couple of years and the future.
Should I start?
Yes, please.
Look, Melissa, I think there is an increasing, the asymmetry is absolutely widening. There should be absolutely no doubt on that front. The power, on the other hand, of these platforms is increasing, and that is just the reality of it. That is just the fact as we see today, and it's just going to continue to compound with AI. The problem, as I said earlier, is that these platforms have never been held accountable. And part of the reason is that innovation, by and large, is not an area that governments have really wanted to regulate. Innovation, creativity. These are not areas that governments have traditionally sought to regulate. But with social media and certainly with AI, there is ample evidence that there is harm, that is criminality, there is misuse that can be that will be and can be used, and therefore there is a need for these regulations and these guardrails. So the asymmetry is absolutely there. I can tell you my own experience as a minister that I spent a considerable amount of my time calling up platforms and saying, please take down these insightful content. Please do it, because there was nothing in the law that let me direct them to do it. And it wasn't that I was asking them to take down content that was critical of me or critical of the government. There was simply things that were about social media being weaponized by, we have a set of very friendly neighbors in our neighborhood, as you know, and I use the word friendly very, very loosely, but this is really now influence operations, weaponizing the internet is really par for the course. And platforms have the power to either deny that weaponization or to be a silent mute spectator or to enable it. So it is an issue for governments, especially democracies and open societies like ours, where 1 billion Indians are on the internet, and misinformation can cause serious issues, especially if it is religious or it is about community and caste, and it is an issue. So therefore, to answer your question, yes, that asymmetry is a problem. And as I said, the only way to solve this is to create some real legal guardrails that platforms have to be held accountable to.
With clear consequences, as you've said, accountability.
Yes.
Chloé, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, I agree with Rajeev, and actually I think answering this question of power of governments on these companies, you have to look at two fields. Obviously, that of governments themselves. And I think regulation can be strong. The EU has shown what it could do on social media with both strong rules, potential sanctions, but also a strong market, which is something you can leverage when you're discussing on these issues. But the second thread is also the private sector itself and the ecosystem. And that's where the importance of avoiding hyper-concentration, having more and more actors develop AI, develop their own models, have a great diversity, also helps to challenge one another. And to my mind, we really need to work on these two tracks, ensure everybody has the building blocks to develop AI so that there's more and more models, and have a regulatory dimension on the other side to make sure that we can maintain this appropriate balance.
And we only have a couple of minutes left, so if anybody does have a question, this is your time. Please submit it now. But Chloé, just to pick up on what you said, you're so right. When we're talking about imbalances and everything, a lot of people here where at the summit, a lot of people there were using AI. They use it in their daily lives. But we still see that much of the world is nowhere close to even adopting AI. So we've already got this clear imbalance at the moment. And what does this mean for future inequality and global power structures? What can we do to make sure that we don't have these two worlds of the haves and have-nots? It's just, that's increased with AI.
Indeed, the risk of an AI worldwide is a huge international challenge, and that was actually at the heart of the summit. And this is why many try to make finding a solution, at least trying to bridge this gap, and making sure that critical resources are accessible to the majority. And one of the answers we found to this question was to create a foundation, which is called Current AI, which was created during the summit, and which aims at doing exactly that, sharing knowledge, best practices, infrastructure, so that there's a much more free access to the development of AIs, and that we can build AI which supports social and economic development in countries. The foundation found partners both in the private sector, countries from developing countries, and private civil society, of course. And we're busy following its setting up so that it can share crucial elements such as financial resources, of course, but also intellectual resources.
I think we're losing you a little bit.
Data, if you want to keep.
Got it. Your tech was.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, it's just breaking up a little, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying there, and so thank you. Rajeev, we've got a couple of seconds. Just close us out. What's one thing you would like to see implemented today to ensure the safeguards and accountability that you mentioned? I think. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes.
Yeah, look, I think the one thing that I would expect, there's many things, but I think the one thing is really to start having this conversation about guardrails with the depth that it deserves. I think the implications of AI on society, on our value systems, on the structural integrity of the world that we live in is not to be underestimated. And while there is this almost a runaway train a narrative about what the great things that AI will do is all partly true. But I think there ought to be a parallel conversation about all of these things that we consider are real challenges. AI is a paradox. It's got many good things that it's going to deliver, but there are going to be serious challenges to the world and to the lives that we see as today. So I think my take would be, out of these conversations, if we can have a deep parallel track on what ought to be the guardrails and what ought to be the do's and don'ts of AI, that would indeed be a good service to humanity and countries at large.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rajeev. Thank you, Chloé. I know we lost her at the end. Very interesting conversation.